Avoid legal snags by telling people they're being recorded. All right, that's good.
There we go.
Good tip.
I'm aware. My mother used to do, she used to be a journalist, right? And she's like, oh, well, you just have to find, like, because she would do sort of investigative bits. And she's like, when she was interviewing someone, she would often say, could I annotate this conversation recordedly?
Right.
I would just have like a little pocket tape thing going. And I'm like, oh, that is the sleaziest thing ever. But go for it. Anyway, now we get a little warning in the top bar of our phone.
That's great. I didn't know your mom was a journalist. That explains.
Oh, my mom's life is way more interesting than my life ever was. She was her state's first female firefighter.
Really?
Yeah, and then became like a journalist, investigative journalist. Yeah.
Maybe that explains why you are so engaged in the whole wildfire issue.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know that specific thing didn't come into play, but like the example she said definitely did. She was very much like action mom, like something's going wrong, she's gonna get her hands dirty. So, yeah.
All right, we already started this conversation. I might include that little bit. I'm sitting here talking to my friend Robert Spangle of 1,000 Yard Style, world-class street style photographer.
Thank you.
Menswear entrepreneur and a collaborator of mine. I think we've known each other for, is it like 7 or 8 years now or something like that?
Yeah.
We first started collaborating on a complete, I think it was the worst delivery of a photographer ever, because you were supposed to shoot an event I held in Florence, Italy during the Pitti Fair.
2014.
Yeah. You came up, emailed me afterwards saying you lost all the hard drives.
I wiped the entire memory card. Yeah.
So it's it's the beginning of a relationship as good as any. We've since done a few projects together, but the reason I wanted to talk to you on this little show of mine is I wanted to sort of understand where you are right now in terms of the, obviously the situation where we're all spending a lot of time at home. I think you guys are more than we are in Sweden, and the way that you are using your social channels to further your business, and also you're working on your sort of gunslinging skills. I see a lot of ways that you are sort of expressing yourself on social media, and you've been doing so for quite some time. So that's why I think it's a good example of how you're sharing sort of your packing skills, for instance. There are a lot of learnings around travel. Can you talk a little bit about how you find, or maybe I don't know if you see it like that, but I just feel like you have this sort of clear, almost like your own voice or your own way of dealing with Instagram and Instagram stories in particular.
No, man. Well, and I don't think I'm a guru or anything like that when it comes to social media, but essentially like it's the same thing as like personal style, right? Like the thing that you have to do is be true to yourself, and the thing that you should do is the thing that only you can do. Not in terms of necessarily like skill sets or abilities, but like what is it that you're interested in? What is the uniqueness of your background makeup that an audience could be, informed and entertained by, right? Like everyone comes from a different background, everyone has different work experience, everyone has different life experiences, and if you can really identify that in yourself, then you sort of know what you have to present to other people. And like, all jokes aside, captive audience, right? That's where we are. So we've got more time to, I think, reflect on ourselves, but also more time to maybe share what experiences we have that we can offer to other people. So myself as a fashion photographer and as a designer. There's a lot of those out there, and there's a lot of really good ones as well. But I think when I'm thinking about myself as a designer or a photographer, or how I present myself on social media, it's looking at the intersection of that part of my life, which has been the last, I'd say 6 years, since I started wiping memory cards at parties in 2014, to today. So the last 6 years of my life, with the previous career that I had, which was being in the Marine Corps, and kind of, where's there an overlap in that? I think a lot of people, and myself included, would think that those two spectrums of life are completely opposite of each other, right? Like, one is like quite glamorous and it's at the height of culture and it's very international, and the other one is like down in the dirt, living in the mud, blood, god awful places, a lot of misery and miscontentment.
So
give
me some background on that. So when did you serve, and where did you serve?
So I served in the Marine Corps from 2007 to 2011, and what I was with, we went all over the world, North Africa, South America twice, trained all across the United States, Afghanistan twice, a little tiny bit of time in Spain, Oman, Greece.
Wow.
So when I got into fashion photography and traveling all the time, I kind of realized, like, I've actually done this before. Like, when I was in the military, I had done the math once, and I had never been anywhere longer than 10 days. For 4 years, 10 days at a maximum, I was moving states or cities or countries or whatever the case was, bases, camps, what have you. So I'd kind of, not intentionally, but gotten really used to like a high functioning kind of nomadic life. You were performing really delicate, I would say precise tasks under a lot of pressure, under really miserable conditions, while moving constantly and basically doing it all out of what you could carry in 2 bags. And to be quite petty about it, like covering fashion weeks and X, Y, and Z can feel kind of the same way. I mean, I remember 2017, I think it was, I worked for 6 months straight and I never went home. I just airplane, hotel, Airbnb, a train, South America, Asia, Europe, 6 months like that. And it just kind of
doing
went
all
by.
the fashion weeks and
different assignments. So I kind of looked at it and like, okay, how can I meet the demands of, let's say, the international creative elite? So someone who travels quite often for work, and also their work has a presence in multiple different cultures and certainly multiple different time zones. It doesn't need to be fashion. It can be, I know most of the people I know who live and work like this are in banking and finance. But there's a lot of them out there. So I was like kind of looking at myself on social media and what can I do that others can't do? And it's like, okay, well, this sort of creative elite that's traveling all the time, they have, really high demands in terms of travel. They need to be very efficient. They definitely benefit from efficiency. They have, obviously they're not getting shot at, but they have a lot of challenges they're dealing with. It is not natural to change countries every 2 days, to be in an airplane that often. So things like organization, little packing hacks, but also the idea of mindfulness and meditation in your life, of keeping a certain amount of reflection in your own work or your own personal life, and the value of ritual. Like, when it comes down to making coffee every morning, or going for a run, which I do pretty adamantly, or working out, or going and doing what I call martial meditation, which is like very kind of focused shooting drills. Not saying that everyone should do that, but that's my thing. There's more reasons to do that beyond just like the exercise or the caffeine. And it took a lot of reflection looking at like, how does this benefit me now versus how did this benefit me in the military, to realize these are rituals, right? I can I might be sleeping on the floor one day, and I might be sleeping on a cot the next day, and I might be sleeping in the mud outdoors the next. But I'm making coffee the same way every single day, and I might be running through a different neighborhood or a different city or a different area every day. But that run can occur at the same time in my day, and it can be the same distance. And there's a sort of repetitiveness in that. Meditation can be kind of the same way. You can choose to start every single morning with 20, 30 minutes of meditation. And each one of those activities has like clear benefits to it. So does kind of like ritualized packing. But they also have the further benefit of like making you feel a little bit more in control of your own life, making you feel a little bit more grounded, which is something I'm sure you can relate to, because I think at least 3/4 of the times I photographed you, you've had a suitcase in your hands. Like, oh, there's Conrad going to Pity with his suitcase for like 2 hours, then he's going somewhere else, you know?
Yeah.
But I might come from a really extreme background, and I might live kind of an extreme life, but increasingly there's an overlap with the experiences of a lot of people working in a creative or international capacity. So I look at kind of those things, and I'm like, okay, how can I bring my experience to bear for these problem sets? I'm not, the guy who's going to give you beauty tips. I'm not the most avant-garde guy when it comes to design. I'm not on, the tip of the spear in terms of what's going on in like pop music. Those are all things that I'm interested in, but like that's not my expertise. I can definitely tell people how to pack or how to kind of like think about things in a tactical or kind of military way. But I look at that intersection of sort of my background and kind of strategy and highly effective nomadic living and the fashion background. That's kind of that's the intersection of my skills, right?
That's exactly where I wanted to get at. And well, let's get to your brand and your products. And we'll get to how you develop those later. But coming into fashion, and I just a few words on how you got into it. But I'm curious when you got into it, when you started traveling to fashion weeks. I know you started as a tailor in London first. That's sort of your entry point into fashion, the way I remembered it. But did you always, because the way, I've been following you since many years, and I feel like it's only like the past 2 or 3 years that you've been so adamant about these, at least, telling the world how you pack and sharing these experiences and these sort of practical elements about it. But going into it, did you bring those experiences from your time as a Marine into the world of fashion, or was it something that you discovered later, like after being it in a couple of years? Like I have to really go back to some of the things I know to be able to deal with this better.
Right. No, I think it was definitely a case of something that I went back to. I think one of the maybe underestimated challenges of being in the military, it's much more in the United States than I think in Scandinavia, because in Scandinavia there's more compulsory service. It's actually more common, I think. It's a more common experience, and it's a little bit shorter duration, and it's not quite as polarizing to your character, let's say. So coming out of the military, I mean, I was 22. I was 22 and I had a lot of life experience maybe, but like I had no idea who I was outside of the military. I was essentially who I'd been told to be and woken up at 5 a.m. as and performed my duties as, and there really wasn't any time in the military to explore, your own interests or navigate life on your own. So a lot of the years after that, I was following a budding interest in fashion and kind of figuring out, okay, who am I outside of the military? And sometimes that was easy, and sometimes I was really having to push myself to not just go about everything in a military way. I went to university in Los Angeles. I studied fashion design long enough for me to realize that I was really much more interested in the purity of tailoring. Tailoring just seemed like this bedrock thing. And
where are you from? Are you from LA or?
I'm from LA originally. Yeah. I'm from Malibu originally. University I went to was in LA. I did that for about a year and a half, and got farther enough in fashion that I was like, this stuff is nice, but I really think I want to do tailoring. I think tailoring, not even necessarily something that I wanted to do forever, but something that I looked at it and I was like, I think this is where you should start if you're going to be working in design. This is the bedrock of it. This is the foundation. So I stuck my head in around Savile Row, found an apprenticeship program there, and I did that for about a year and a half. And I learned way more in London in a few weeks than I did in semesters and semesters of school, because you were on Savile Row, you were training and working, you were meeting other people who were interested, and you were really it's a bit different now, but London is certainly a fashion city, and Los Angeles is certainly like a secondary or tertiary fashion city at best. There's a lot of production here, but there really isn't the culture for it. So just interacting with peers who were becoming designers or trying to pull things off or being assistant designers, that was really eye-opening. I had a camera with me, and being an American with absolutely like no politesse and just the gumption to go up and harass nice British people about what they were wearing, I would go when I was going to work every day and on my lunch hour and just bother people like, what is the suit you're wearing? Where was it made? Asking questions and taking photos.
Doing that, was like, sartorialist around? Did you have any like role models in terms of that?
Definitely. No, I mean, I knew about Scott Schumann's work before I ever had a camera, and I have to give him credit not just for my career as a photographer, but also as a designer and maybe even getting into fashion. I was looking at his work when I was still in the Marine Corps, before I was even really heavily interested in fashion. And the thing that his work did for me that I've tried to kind of internalize the ethos of is his perspective really was that fashion is what people do with it, not necessarily what the industry says it is. So it was really gratifying for me to see his work and see guys that I could relate to, everyday people who didn't look like idealized models necessarily, really executing creativity and kind of self-creation in their own clothing. So I started following suit when I was in London. I started a little bit in LA, but mostly London, just taking photos of anyone I was interested in. And it was probably a year and a half, and I did not ever consider myself a photographer. I was just documenting. And I would take the photo and I would look at it and try to figure out from a tailoring perspective, like, how did this work? Why did this work? What cut was used? How did they round the back? What's going on here? And going back to that kind of intersection of, your interest is here, whatever you're interested in life. And I think everyone should know this. And then your skill sets are here, right? Like, you can just follow your skills and maybe you're really good at math and you end up doing banking and you're really miserable. Or you can follow your passions, which is maybe you're really into, Formula One racing, and you just follow that. You spend all your time following up on statistics or X, Y, and Z. But if you find the intersection of those two things, that's where you're going to be happiest in life. That's where you're going to do your best work. So if you're into crunching numbers and mathematics, and you're also really into Formula One, maybe you should be a race engineer, because that's right in the middle. So for me, I was really interested in fashion, and I was looking at, designing and tailoring and photography, and suddenly there was this intersection where I was taking photos of everyday people on the street who had amazing style, and I was looking at it from a sartorial sense, like a tailoring sense, and I was also creating images with that. And it took way too long for me to figure this out. It took my girlfriend at the time telling me, hey, you're an okay tailor, but you're a pretty great photographer, to be like, oh, that's a job. Why don't I do that? So I was taking photos for a long time before I ever considered it a career. And it took people around me saying, hey, you're really excited when you take photos, and you're waking up early to do this, and you're pretty good at this, and you're just kind of an okay tailor. It took a lot of people saying that for me to be like, oh, I do enjoy doing this. I should, put together a portfolio or something. So I think there was a 3-month period after I'd made that decision where I was waking up at 5 a.m., which in London is much more daunting than Los Angeles, and hitting the streets as early as I could to get people commuting to work in Mayfair and taking photos, going out at lunch, shooting all the time at lunch, and then if I could at night as well, taking photos, to put together a kind of portfolio, and spent 3 months doing that. And right at the end of that, I sent out a couple portfolios. I sent out 100 portfolios, actually. I remember it was a number. I sent out 100 portfolios. I researched all the people I wrote them to. I wrote them all personal emails. Image selection changed for each person, and like one person got back to me. 6 months later, 2 of those people got back to me. But shortly after I sent out those portfolios, someone that I hadn't sent a portfolio to because I didn't have the balls was British GQ. So someone there had been following my Tumblr, and that should tell you what year this was roughly,
Right.
and saw some kind of promise in it and was like, this is our guy, let's give him a shot. So they offered me a job covering the fashion weeks, which I was very excited about, and did not bother to tell them that I had never worked as a photographer.
So are you completely autodidactical? You're not trained as a photographer at all?
No. So when I started, that was all on my own. And I mean, I did my own research. There's a lot of, no one will ever see the photos from the first 2 years, probably ever. I burned those somewhere. That was part of your party photos. I'm sorry. I just burned all
wiped.
But no, I was mostly self-taught. When I got out there and working, I had 2 really great mentors of mine who taught me a lot more. Adam Katz-Sindig, who's still my mentor, and my buddy David Nyazi. And then after that, because I could not afford to live in London, I moved back to LA. And then I also went to go finish my degree in industrial design versus fashion design. And when I was there, then I started taking all these photography courses. So that's where I learned like studio lighting and all that. But that was after I'd already been working professionally for probably a year and a half. Mm-hmm. So I sort of did it in reverse. But the other thing is, I find that if you can find, the intersection of where your interests are and also your natural ability is, you will mostly have you'll have the ability to teach yourself enough that others can teach you. Like if, you ask me to do my taxes, I do it every year, like a couple hours before it's due, and it's just like pulling nails. But if it's something I'm interested in, if it's something, there's a project I've been working on in a foreign country that I won't name, and I spent all my free time for months researching this country and reading books and talking to people who've been there and looking into the culture of it, and like that's because I'm interested in it. I'm interested enough to teach myself. So I think it's an important thing to find, again, like the intersection of your sort of ability and interest, because even if there isn't a school for it, even if it's a kind of like insider only situation, like that will give you the fire to kind of go out and self-start and go out there and make dumb mistakes or make friends who will teach you, whatever the case is.
So there's a level of meticulousness that I see in your work and the way that you approach what you do, and especially with the Observer collection that you're doing now with the bags and the reused denim and all that. But is that something that comes from more what you're talking about now, is your interest and your passions, or is there like tactics there that you get from your time as a Marine in terms of doing research or preparing yourself for a specific task?
I mean, I think that the underlying word in that is preparedness, which goes hand in hand with another P word, which is paranoia. Which I've been sort of dancing with my whole life. But I think fundamentally what it comes down to is there was something that I learned in the Marine Corps, and a little bit of it is institutional and is taught, but part of it is just almost a coping mechanism. If you're preparing for an operation, a military operation, or likewise, if you're preparing for a really, really intensive multi-day international photo shoot with the client on site and really high expectations and an absurd amount of looks to accomplish, the level of stress is pretty high. You kind of know what to expect, but you also never really know exactly what's going to happen. And I kind of came to the conclusion in my military career that there was this sort of mantra of like percentages, right? Like up until the point where you're departing for the mission or the photo shoot or whatever it is, you owe it to yourself to seek every advantage, right? Like get your sleep, eat your meals. But if you have, if all your stuff's ready and you've got a little extra time, you've got 9 hours before the shoot, like spend that 9 hours thinking about every single X and Y variable that you can improve upon. Do everything you possibly can to bring your best self to the mission. And a majority of what that means is really being proficient and being professional, and being, tactically sound and really well trained, which is about the same thing in photography as it is in the military. Like it's a lot of experience. It's a lot of going out there and experimenting. It's a lot of testing. But maybe the part that is easier to relate to people verbally is also just like preparedness of equipment. In terms of design, is like how thoroughly can you design something, right? I find that if I go out and I'm using the same equipment I always use, and it's stuff that I've modified or I've made myself or I've really used quite a lot, like I feel much better going into any situation because I know I can accomplish it. I know I can be elastic to the situation. I know it can be really adaptable. But if I'm going out with like a new piece of equipment or a lot of unanswered kind of X and Y variables, like oftentimes it works out just fine, but the burden of the unknown is pretty heavy. Like, how is this thing going to perform? Do you really know? So taking care of those things through really thorough design, really thorough planning beforehand, and also just keeping consistent in the way you pack. Like any job I go and do anywhere, it's the same suitcases, it's the same bags to pack. I have the same clothes for almost all of it. Maybe the jacket changes if it's hot, or there's more board shorts if it's cold or hot, whatever. But that consistency level of testing and design gives you a certain amount of peace of mind that just makes your actual work much more enjoyable, rather than stressing out about, do I have the right adapter for, whatever.
Or a memory card to keep your photos after the assignment. Yeah. So sorry about coming back to that, but this is so inspiring to me because I'm the complete opposite as a personality. I bought a new mic and I'm using it for the first time for this conversation. I didn't even test it before, and I hope that it works. Right. So there's and maybe that's the reason I'll never be a good photographer. That attention to equipment I don't have. So I'm just perhaps also that's why I'm looking very carefully at your post, because there's a level of meticulousness that I've been talking about. There's a level of attention to detail that I really admire, and I'm curious because I've seen things that I've sort of entered my memory from previous posts of yours. For instance, I know that you at some point taped the logo of your camera to prevent people to ask questions about it or prevent people to steal your expensive camera. It's just one of those details that I remember. And I'm curious about, I also see that you're scribbling or journaling or taking notes in longhand in the
I've got it right in front of me
with the beautiful observer passport case. Do you take notes during your travels and during your work when you think of something, or I should pack that, or I should adjust that, or do you do that continuously as you're doing it, or do you sort of reflect when you're coming back home, like I should do this differently, or I should get that piece of equipment, or I should alter that in a way? I'm
Mm.
curious how the process works. If it's when you're in the zone or out on the field, say.
Right.
Are you then just thinking about the task, or are you also then sort of thinking about how to sort of adjust your equipment or your
Right.
packing or?
Well, I think it's there's a little bit of a balance. I mean, there's so much, not now, obviously, but there's so much going on in my life when I'm working, and there's kind of so many spinning plates to keep track of. And at the same time, it's also so important that when I'm actually working, that I'm entirely present and I'm entirely focused on the image that you're trying to accomplish. So there's kind of a balance there, right? Like if I leave it until the end of a job, the end of a trip to remember like what it was about that bag that annoyed me or what it was that was successful, then the small details you're going to forget. And you probably still remember some of the big ones, but that means doing another sample, another prototype, delaying things by another month or two. So like one of the things that I designed is this passport wallet that holds your passport and a small sketchbook. And that's kind of like a pretty good example of how I approach things. Like I always need a passport with me. This is the first time in years I've not had a passport on me every single day because I know I'm not going anywhere tomorrow. But
Right.
any other time in my life, even if I'm home for a week, I always have my passport with me because it's there. I don't need to worry about it. It's my second form of ID, and I can jump on a plane if I need to, without having to have that like pat down panic where you're like, oh, where is it? And then the other thing I always need is a sketchbook. And the simple thing is like sometimes you're like, you're getting groceries or you're walking home, and like that's when the solution to that problem hits you. And if I wait to get home, I might forget it. I might lose it in a million other details. So like I literally just draw it out or write it out there. And then on the kind of reflective side of things, if there's something about your equipment that's bugging you, if you're getting some weird error on the lens, like I write that down pretty much as soon as I can. I'm not going to disrupt a photo shoot for it, but like the moment there's a pause, that's getting written down, and then I can go back and like review that when I get home and figure out what needs to be tweaked or traded or sold or upgraded or whatever. But the other part of it is like how I start my day. So every day, wherever I am on earth, I wake up in the morning, I make my coffee, I meditate for 20, 25 minutes, 30 if I'm really lucky, and then I write out in order what I need to do that day. And it doesn't matter. Like the to-do that day could be like drink 3 beers in the sun.
Right.
It doesn't need to be a massive laundry list. It almost always is a massive laundry list. It almost never gets completed. I think that's happened 3 times in my life. But it's just a good thing to start the day the same way, clear my head out, and then have really clear objectives throughout the day. So it's a bit anachronistic to maybe still writing out things long form. But for me, one of these journals generally lasts me about 2 or 3 weeks on the road. I come back, I can go through it and look at, okay, this is what I'm thinking about quite consistently. Here's this jacket I keep sketching out, so like I should probably make that or start a sample or put the tech pack together or whatever. And then as far as like recording experiences goes, I can see how like, hey, this suitcase wheel keeps falling off. What do I do about that? Like that's just stressing me out. Do I need to change my suitcase? Is there some special screw I can use? Or the other side of that, like I have a designer friend of mine who's asked me to test out a jacket for him. And like, there's a section in my notebook that's just notes on this jacket, like zipper catches, or it doesn't really work very well if I have a scarf. Not that any of that's actually occurring, but like I write down all of it. And then things like coffee that I've liked or whiskey that I liked, that's the back section of every journal I have. And when it comes time to like restock the home bar, I just go through the last couple of months of journals and I'm like, oh, this weird Japanese whiskey was great. I'll find some of that, We experience so much, but we lose so much of it if it's not reflected on. So
I love it. And can you speak to two-part question. One, what notebooks do you use, and can you speak to why you're doing this in an actual physical notebook with a pen as opposed
Right.
to some app in your phone? Because
Right.
I'm sort of I'm both ways here. I find I have apps that I do notes in, but and I had a period of my life where I actually stopped using notebooks completely.
Right.
When I was editor-in-chief of PLOS, I was somewhere around when I became editor-in-chief, and I thought, like, I'm not a reporter anymore. I can just do everything, and
Right.
digitally, and it's all connected. It's all in the cloud. I have access to everything. It's backed up.
Right.
I can't lose
It's
it.
all in the cloud.
But I
Yeah.
I really now I'm using a notebook every day, and more
Yeah.
and more. I understand. I tend to think that I get much more of my creative work done in a notebook, even if I'm doing presentations for clients, or as you're saying, you're doing like to-do lists for my business or anything. Even if it's not sort of reporter work or writing, I still
Right.
use my notebook. So I'm curious to how, have you always done the notebook, or have you been off it any time, or why is it important to do notebook and not like an app like Day One or Evernote or
Right.
something like that?
And I did a couple of those apps
Yeah.
about 2 years ago, and I really liked them. And it's sort of oxymoronic about it because I also use a massive iPad quite a lot for actually doing photo editing, and also for taking sketches to finished design sketches, because it's really great for that. But it's not something. I mean, as a photographer, I'd like to be light on my feet, like just me and my camera and my wallet. And like, if that's how I could operate all the time, I definitely would. So carrying around like another screen is something I want to avoid. The tactile feel of working on a sketchbook or journal is kind of irreplaceable. A phone is just a little bit too small. It's like quite the same using a pen. But I think this is something I've noticed like the last year. I really hate screens, and just like my eyes are just tired of them. I've got special made glasses now for when I am working on a screen.
Really?
Yeah, just eye fatigue. I mean, I think the eye fatigue of working as a photographer, your eyes are just burning all the time, and then you're getting home and you're spending a couple hours editing every single picture, and then reviewing those pictures and sending those pictures. It's a lot of screen time, so I try to get away from that. But yeah, there's a kind of a balance there, because I'm about efficiency and being very, being as efficient as possible. And it's nice that like everything's on the cloud. So like I do have an iPad that I use more and more now, but I don't go a day without a sketchbook. I part of it's just like routine. I've had a sketchbook since I was, 11 maybe. I mean, through my entire time in the Marine Corps. In the Marine Corps, it's actually obligatory to have a notebook with you.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something I always carried with me.
Why is it obligatory?
To write down detailed commands if you're getting a briefing. It's a bit of a joke, but it's definitely like every single Marine has like a pen and a notebook with him. My specialty was reconnaissance, so we were also recording a lot of information, and you didn't want that to be in a format of something that ran on batteries. And then another weird kind of intersections of like passport and sketchbooks, and something that the passport wallet came out of was, and also relates to captivity. I did a specialty training course called Survival, Escape, Resistance, SEER School. So it's to train you what to do if you're captured, how to escape, how to resist interrogation, and how to survive kind of like high risk situations involving terrorist organizations or X, Y, and Z. And it's mandatory for personnel that they're worried about are high risk of being captured, high risk of having to go on the run. It's a lot of fun. I didn't really enjoy it at the time, but it's a lot of fun. You get to run from the police. You get sort of like lightly tortured and interrogated. You get to lie to the cops. It's cool. It's kind of like James Bond school, but not very elegant. And something that they taught us, which always stuck with me, was to anytime we were traveling on order. So you've got your passport with you. to have a notebook that's the same size with you, that's in it looks like a passport and is in a different color. Because the chances are, if you're in some situation, it's going to be like an airplane, a bus, a train terminal, and someone's waving a gun around, taking hostages, not to get really grim, but they've got too many people to handle, and they're just going to go off the color of your passport. You've got a blue passport, you're I guess American, so you're a bad guy, you're coming with us. So ever since then, I carried a little sketchbook that is one of two different colors, either green or red, so I can pass myself off as British or Canadian. Or I guess green, I'm not going to go as Palestinian or Indian, but that might work too. So then there was this idea of like, oh, I want a passport and a sketchbook together.
And is there a specific brand to the notebooks that you use?
Oh yeah, Muji makes ones, which you can find like anywhere, and they're exactly the right size. They're passport size. There's a slightly better company called Traveler's Notebook, which is a bit harder to find. I mean, you can order them online. Any place that has like Japanese goods will carry it. I buy them in stacks like this and just go through them. Yeah.
Do you keep them in order somewhere? Is there archive of Spangle notebooks?
I've got. I'm not going to pan over there, but I have like all of my notebooks from, I think 2008, 2007.
Yeah.
In like somewhat sequential order.
Yeah. One last question on the notebooks, and then we'll get into the collection that you're designing. Is there a specific routine in terms of going back and reading your notes? Is there like you're going back the past month or something in terms of sort of recuperating notes that you've done, or I mean I would assume after a while going back to something that you wrote 6 months ago or 8 months ago would be
It's just
hard.
embarrassing.
So well, maybe that too. But
depends how far you go back, right?
Do you write it out in the computer or just collect through various categories of notes or anything like that?
I have written out if I'm going back and looking at like specific asks. So if I'm working on like writing around the brand, or if I'm working specifically on articles that I'm writing, that's something I do all the time. That's something I do certain times, and a lot of it has to do with places I've been and experiences I've had. And then I look back and I'm like, oh, it was at this restaurant and it was, this time of year. So if it's not something specific where I'm like looking up something that happened around a specific event, like we had this fire in Malibu where I used to live about 2 years ago. And that was great because I had everything that had happened in my notebook, and I went on to write an article about that, and I had, the dates and times for everything. But more often than not, what I do is like whenever I finish a sketchbook, I go through it again. Just briefly, and it's more about seeing repeated themes and repeated designs. Some of the designs, like I can look back and I'm like, man, I've been sketching this for years. Like I either have to do this or I just need to forget it. And also you can see kind of how did that idea evolve? Did I have maybe different design pathways I could have gone down, and like maybe the first version was the best version, whatever. But then also like personally, looking at my to-do list, what is the one thing that I never cross off besides my taxes? Like what is this thing that I'm avoiding, or what am I not making time for? What's something that has repeatedly kind of like fallen off the plate, and like, okay, let's address this now, or like let's move on. So I think in design, it's really useful because you can kind of keep track of your own like little ideas. And then personally, it's also useful because you can see where you're stagnating and where you're growing. And it's clear as day. Was it crossed out or was it not crossed out?
That's a good tip. So tell me about the Observer collection. When did that start, and how do you go about managing that?
Oh boy. Well, until this whole like coronavirus thing, it was very much like, when do I have free time, and working on it. Then started it in 2018, but it was actually my thesis, my senior thesis for when I was studying industrial design, fashion design, and then industrial design. So my kind of culinary effort was this collection. And then it took about a year after I graduated to actually get things into production and get a website going and figure out how it was going to work. But it came from personal experience as part of it, but also a really clear difference between fashion design and industrial design. So in fashion design, you are designing something purely out of creative narrative, which I really enjoy. Like there is a level to beauty to that of just creating a narrative with clothes that I will always find intoxicating, and no amount of functionality will ever belittle. But industrial design or product design is much more based on customer research. So you're researching who your customer is, your consumer, your target audience, and going really deep with their problems. And if you can find their problems or issues, sure, it's fine if you figure out a better way to turn off a light bulb, but it's really much better if you address someone's fear of the dark. So you're learning to go to a really, really spiritual level with design and solve problems, potentially societal and cultural problems, which I find much more appealing. So I spent my last 6 months of school, or the first 6 months of my last year of school, just looking at a problem that I could address. And essentially what I came up with was, I'm doing school, but I'm also cutting school quite a lot to go and do fashion photo shoots and work for different magazines. And all of my friends are doing the same thing. They're not in school, but they're flying around the world. They're taking trains around the world. They're working constantly, and they're working in a really consistent way, but all over the world. Different cultures, different projects, different mediums, but they're all traveling quite often, and there's a unique set of problems that are presented to them. Essentially, they're nomads again, right? They're traveling seasonally. They're nomads or they're migrant workers, right? Because they're traveling seasonally for work. So, there are the physical challenges of that, right? Like jet lag sucks. How do you keep up a physical routine when you're drinking way too much every single night and also changing cities every 2 days? But then there's also the more existential problems. Home is something we need as human beings. And I think we're all more aware of that after 5 weeks of lockdown than we were before. But home is something we need. We also need, excitement. And I think we're really aware of that, having been locked up inside for 5 weeks. Like, we need to explore, and we need change in environments, and we need challenges. But in equal measure, we also need some kind of consistency. So the kind of rabbit hole I went down is you have these guys and girls who need to work to a really high level of professionalism every single day with drastically changing backgrounds and a lot of physical and mental stress placed on them. How do I address their need for home? And the answer was ritual. So ritual dressing, daily rituals, creating opportunity for ritual in the clothing and equipment people have. So that's what Observer was born out of, looking at how you can kind of create a uniform for these guys that serves as a ritual uniform, something they put on every single day, something they use every single day, something that they can use in any environment they're operating across. And also on a cultural level, something that is appropriate in most places on Earth, right? And I think the Scandinavians are kind of the king of that. Like, I think if you get really into Scandinavian design, it becomes kind of Japanese, which is super cool.
Yeah, probably.
But I think part of being comfortable in a constantly changing background, and why a lot of these guys end up in fashion, is because when you're operating in, Japan or Europe or the Middle East, like, you can feel a bit uncomfortable if you're dressed totally like the locals are, because it's not really your clothing, you're not really used to it. But likewise, you're going to feel really uncomfortable if, you're running around northern Iraq wearing, like a rowing blazer and khakis, like.
Right.
So trying to find a uniform that is universal, non-referential, something that, presents you well anywhere you go in the world, but does not scream American, Scandinavian, German, Japanese, whatever.
But right now, it's been two types of bags, right? And the denim. The idea is to do like a complete wardrobe.
Yeah, the idea is always larger than
right.
What's actually out there. So let's see. Right now, and the struggle with me has been keeping everything in stock at the same time, which I'm working on. But right now we've got 2 bags, a wallet, the jeans. We did a watch a year ago. Is there anything else? I'm sure there's more, and it's just spinning in my head. I've done a couple other like little accessories and things like that.
So when you say we, do you have a team or like
Oh, I'm sorry. I
co-conspirators, or
hate
is it
doing
just
that
you?
because everyone says we. Like that's one of my problems with modern branding is like every website and brand is we this, we that, and it's like no,
Yeah.
you're not a secret army. Like I should just say I because it's me. I mean,
Okay.
all my friends have helped me out. All my friends have helped me out, but it is definitely something that is a product of my all my strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
But now that we've had this lovely downtime, we've got 2 more bags on the way. The jeans just came out, which I'm really happy about. I wanted to do that for a year and a half and haven't had the opportunity. And then I've got the first 3 silhouettes ready whenever Italy decides to open for business again.
Is it gonna
But
be
I don't
tailoring
see
or jackets or what's
tailoring. One tailored silhouette, one combative silhouette, so something for working in like a really working and getting your hands dirty, right? And then a leisure silhouette, so something that is for relaxing. And ideally, all 3 silhouettes are interchangeable, so you could blend them to kind of your
right?
needs.
Right.
But I don't really see myself ever doing like a 30-piece collection or even a 15-piece collection or doing like 15 different bags. I really think it's like 3 bags, 3 silhouettes of clothing, just a uniform, interchangeable
So it's
uniform.
more like marrying the tactical approach to like tailored look or like casual look or
Right. It's kind of like it's the applying that strategy to different problems. There's
mm,
tactical, even when I was in the military, tactical was kind of like a joke catchphrase because it doesn't really mean anything. A little bit like, I don't know. There's quite a lot of, there's like classic with a twist in menswear, right? It's like almost the moment you hear it, you're sort of wincing. But the idea is like applying the strategy to whatever you're designing. You know, if you're what tactical is to me is something that is efficient and has no resistance and is efficient, has very, very low resistance, and is supremely adaptable, right? And that in return makes you comfortable. Now, to some people, that could look like a really slick guy rappelling out of a helicopter with a fancy flashlight. To me, it could be that, but it could also just be a guy who can, you know, go about his everyday life, taking his photos, going around a new city, whatever the case is, and then like rolling into a really high level meeting and you know performing well and comfortably there. And I think there's an interesting dialogue that sort of needs to be had there, where a lot of this is quite negative, but like you know, vintage military always gets reinterpreted into menswear, right?
mm,
And that's basically on a fixed timeline. You know, 20 years from the beginning or end of a conflict, those clothing have now become vintage, and they wind up going onto the vintage market, and they get absorbed. And then you've got, you know, hippies and cool guys wearing M65 field jackets. So the conflicts that I was involved in are now essentially becoming military vintage, and you're seeing the kind of tactical style pop up in different brands. So Kanye West's Yeezy brands, Alex, Christian Dior recently, Balenciaga, they've all referenced like the hardware and the styling of the kind of military units that I was a part of. So it's really tempting to go down that road because it's kind of cool now. But at the same time, I'm aware that I'm trying to design in a deep way. So it's not just about like the roller coaster belt buckles and like combat boots. It's a little bit more about the feeling that you get out of wearing the clothes.
it's you know it's so rare that you can get to talk to someone who's equally or more into white denim as myself. So I thought it was curious that you went for a batch of, was it vintage Levi's that you fixed yourself or sewed up yourself and patched
Oh
up
yeah.
yourself, or
So I mean, I've been and like 2 years ago, if you told me like, Robert, you're gonna wear white denim every single day, I would have just laughed at you. But I literally wear white jeans that I've made or altered like every single day, And a lot of that is from people I run into from street style. I mean, I remember you wearing them. I remember Alessandro Squarzi wearing them. The first time I met Matt Hranick, he was wearing them, and that was kind of a light bulb moment. And then my other friend Ryan Gray, who got me heavily into denim maybe 7 or 8 years ago, was always wearing them. And it sort of became a uniform for me. It's a weird thing to wear if you're, kicking around the world and getting kind of dirty and scuffed up. But I found that there's almost like a philosophical value to them. It's like, if you really worry about your jeans getting dirty, you're not going to look good in white jeans. But if you come to the mindset where you're like, stains are okay, little battle scars are okay.
Right.
Like, I'm just going to wash them in the hotel bathroom. Who cares? Like, if you can come to that point, they start looking great, even though they're dirty. I mean, I still wear ones that I crashed a motorcycle on and like tore up to shreds, and it's fine. But as far as making them, people were asking, and after wearing them for like 2 years, I'd kind of figured out a formula on how to get them to fit the way I wanted. So early 80s vintage made in USA Levi's, like great fabric quality.
Is it 501s or
501s?
Yeah.
And the 501s have changed a lot more quickly in the last 20 years than they did in the previous 40 years. So like 80s are pretty consistent, a little bit more higher waisted. It's a better fit overall. Finding those is pretty hard because they're made in USA and they're white Levi's. So like finding ones that aren't trashed, finding them in quantities is like, it took me a year to get the first batch, and the first batch was 6. It was like a joke. And I sewed them myself at home because I was like, well, I got nothing else to do this week. But taking those, doing a lot of alterations to the center back seam and the center waistband to make it take a larger size it down so it has a bit of a higher waist. I like a higher waisted fit. I think it looks better. It looks better with a suit. And then if you add an internal self belt to it, which is what I've done to all of mine, now you don't need to wear a belt when you're traveling. You don't have to worry about taking off through TSA. And if you're going, I don't know how most people are, but for me, like whenever I'm traveling, by some miracle, I'm always losing weight.
It's good.
Always. I mean, it's good, but it's because I'm just
well,
like,
you're
working
moving.
too much.
I mean, you're on your feet like
Right.
10, 12 hours a day. So that's.
But I find that most people, like, if they're traveling a lot, are either gaining weight or losing weight because they're eating better and stress is affecting them one way, or they're not eating enough and stress is affecting them one way. So like, it's really hard to get a tailored trouser that fits perfectly because it might fit you when you start, but it's not going to fit you 3 weeks into it. So a really, really functional, really, let's say successful internal self belt, because a lot of the side tab adjusters on tailored trousers, like even tailors, are like, it doesn't really do anything. So that you get a better fit, more adaptable fit, and then doing a bit of styling on it, which this weird intersection between cowboys from Texas and Montana and Catholics in Rome.
Right.
So when I was growing up, if you pressed your jeans, if you iron a crease into the knee of them, you were like a redneck. I've grown to love rednecks, but when I was a kid, if you did that, you were a redneck and you were not very cool at all. And it was like a joke. And I don't think my thoughts on that changed. And then maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I spent a lot of time in Rome and I went there a few times. And I remember seeing these Catholic families going to Mass on Sunday, and all of the kids and some of the older guys would iron their jeans with this insanely sharp crease. And you could even see a sort of fade on the crease. And I fell in love with it, because what I hadn't understood about my redneck friends growing up, that I came to understand through Romans, just through being more interested in a culture that wasn't my own, was that Rome might be a really beautiful city, but it's gone through, historically, it's just gone through so many wars and so many famines, so many periods of starvation. That's where a lot of their food comes from, because they're using bits that no one else wants to cook. And that's also where a lot of their clothing comes from. They're really quite, they're very reserved with their clothing. They really care about longevity. They're quite thrifty with it. So like, by wearing jeans to church, that's kind of, in a way, it's quite cheap. Those are work clothes, right? But by pressing them and ironing them and cleaning them, they're showing that they care, that they put an effort into it, that they want to look good for Sunday Mass. And I came to understand, of course, cowboys, my redneck friends, like that's why they put a crease in their jeans. They can't afford a nice wool suit and they work too hard. They would destroy it in a week, but they can spend an hour and a half ironing and creasing them. So I did a bit of that as far as styling goes, and it becomes this kind of amalgamation of tailoring, travel, and then like just two cultures thrown at each other that probably never intersect in real life.
That's a great mix. I also find that, and I spoke to when I met Alessandro Squarci for the first time. I had to talk to him about white jeans, and he said something along the lines of they're best like the third day. Like if you use them for 3 days, that you have to get some stain in them. And I think the beauty of white denim also is that even just a few feet or a few meters afar, they don't look dirty because it blinds your eyes in a way in contrast to the rest of what you're wearing. So it kind of always
you can't
looks
really
a little
tell.
bit, you always look a little bit crisper with white denim, even though it's been used for a couple of days.
Right. Well, and I think it works. It's also, I think looking at Alessandro Squarci specifically, there's this kind of, I don't know, like is sort of international color palette. Like it works in France. It definitely works in Scandinavia. It certainly works in Italy. It works in the United States. And it's kind of like off-white, cream, very, very white beige color that like you see in the white jeans. A navy blue that changes a little bit between the United States and France. The blue hue kind of changes a little bit, but it's still pretty common. And then like faded OD green, and like knowing that, and also just for my own preferences, that's kind of become my wardrobe. But I find that white, even a dirty, beat up white, works for me a lot better as like a universal color. Like I can wear that anywhere, and it's not really problematic. Whereas a lot of other colors can be problematic. So like black has more and less serious connotations, and they're not going to like to hear this, but more or less serious connotations in certain places I've been. So like that's like the first uniform, right? Like that's like the cool architect uniform. It's like we're all blacks. Like that doesn't really work. Bright colors can have really, really different connotations depending on where you go. Red in the United States can be really problematic. It can also be really uplifting or really problematic depending on which part of Asia you're in. If you're wearing a lot of blue, that color of blue can really, really pare down where in the world someone is from, even if it's a universal color. So like white jeans, green jackets, blue shirts, like that kind of works everywhere for me. It's the sort of functional side of it.
That's interesting. We're going to wrap up soon, but I'm curious, the past few weeks, staying at home, doing your content from at home, exploring your brand and going in depth in that. Is there something you learned just from staying at home at the extended amount of time, which is kind of not your usual forte?
No, this is the longest I've been home since I was 17. Like years and years. I think the longest I've been in one place was 2 weeks at most. So that's really unusual. I guess I'm surprised that I like it so much. Obviously I miss travel, and I miss the assignments that I had to cancel. That's really frustrating, but I'm just impressed that I managed to make a routine out of doing this every single day, and it doesn't really it hasn't made me incredibly stir crazy, and it hasn't really bothered me. It's been really fulfilling to have that much of a blank canvas to create rituals with, if that makes sense. Like normally the only consistency I can get in a day is like a cup of coffee in the morning if I'm lucky. And now it's like, oh my God, I can decide what I'm going to do every single hour. Like that's really something else. It's been really beneficial in terms of meditation and trying to apply that in different ways, because that's something that like even getting 25 minutes a day is, when I'm on the road, is really challenging. And now it's like, oh, I can spend an hour and a half on this if I want. If anything, it's been a struggle to exist in a world where like my internal life day to day is very, very peaceful now. and is very consistent, which is totally unheard of for me. And then at the same time, I'm really aware, mostly talking to my friends in New York and in Italy, that like the world is a really, really dark place for a lot of people right now. So on a personal level, it's been really good, and I've almost been shocked that I've handled it. On the other hand, it's a struggle to kind of remind myself that, you know, I'm in this bubble, but a lot of other people are in a totally different situation.
And I guess we should have started with this, but where are you at exactly? Because if you know, one follows you on Instagram, you have this very lovely little wooden paneled, I don't know if it's an apartment or a house with a great view in Los Angeles.
Yeah, so it's a house in Los Angeles, in an older part of Los Angeles, Eagle Rock, which I moved here in September, but I didn't really have furniture until like a few weeks before this whole coronavirus thing happened, maybe 2 weeks before, because I was traveling so much. I was sitting on my packed boxes.
It's good that you have furniture when the lockdown starts.
Yeah, no, that was really fortunate timing. Or, I mean, I'm still sitting on a suitcase right now, but it'd be much less comfortable. Well, yeah, Los Angeles is I think growing up I was really bored of it, and then having traveled quite a bit, I realized that it's a really great place to have a base. For design and photography, there's an amazing amount of production in studios available. The weather's amazing. I mean, last weekend, 25-minute drive, I was in the snow. And if I go in 30 minutes the other direction and the beaches were not being patrolled by the police, I could have been in the water. So good weather. You also get quite a lot of space. And though I've kind of given up on motorcycles, I'm still really into cars. And that's something that's a possibility in Los Angeles, but like in London, which I love that city so much, forget about it. It's like, you've got to be the prince of something if you want to have a parking spot, you know? So that's where I'm situated now, and I'm quite happy here.
That's wonderful. And just one last question. Is there anything you want to recommend, any movie you've seen or any book you've read during the past few weeks that you want to pass on to the listeners?
Yeah, the Book of Five Rings is something I put off reading for a long time, and that, in terms of just strategy and spirituality, is amazing. I really, really enjoyed that. I'd also really recommend The Book of Five Rings, and Sebastian Junger's Tribe. It's 98 pages, and like probably the most critical book you could read about contemporary times, and also what humans are during crisis, which is really, really important now. I mean, it's almost a page by page on like what to do with Corona and why people are acting the way they're acting. And get the Criterion Channel app. That's amazing. That's like Everness is on Netflix, and you could be watching some of the best cinema with incredible commentary from all around the world. You basically can't go wrong. If I start talking about movies, I'll be here for like 3 hours, but Criterion Channel, go for it.
We'll do a follow-up episode with that.
Okay, absolutely.
Robert, thank you so much for your insights, for your recommendations, and for your inspirations on your social feed and all the good work you're doing as a photographer. It's really inspiring. And thank you so much for talking to me.
Well, Conrad, thank you for having me.